Dawn found James in the mansion's vast library, surrounded by stacks of ancient texts and his grandmother's journals. He hadn't slept, too engrossed in the strange history unfolding before him. His grandmother's neat handwriting detailed decades of interactions with Venna and Roxa, including complex theories about their true nature and origin. "Your tea, Master Thorn," Roxa's voice startled him from his reading. She placed a steaming cup beside him, Earl Grey with a hint of honey, exactly as he preferred. Her twilight-colored skin seemed to shimmer in the early morning light filtering through the library's tall windows. "Thank you," he said, noticing how her constellation-like patterns pulsed more rapidly than the day before. "Are you feeling all right?" "The energy depletion has begun," she admitted quietly. "It will become more noticeable as time progresses." James closed the journal he'd been reading. These records mention previous attempts to understand the contract. Why did they all fail? They asked the wrong questions. Venna's voice came from the doorway. She entered with silent grace, her silver hair catching the light. They focused on the terms of service rather than the purpose behind them. "And what is that purpose?" James asked, watching as Venna's normally fluid movements seemed slightly less smooth than before. "We are not permitted to say directly," Venna replied. "The contract itself prevents full disclosure. Each Thorn must discover the truth independently." James stood, pacing between the towering bookshelves. "Yet you're clearly suffering. These patterns in your skin, they're energy manifestations, aren't they? Like a visual battery indicator." Roxa exchanged a surprised look with Venna. "Your grandmother made similar observations. You share her insight." "She wrote about experiments," James continued. "Attempts to stabilize your energy through different means. Technology, ritual, even emotional connection. Nothing worked permanently. The contract requires specific conditions," Venna said carefully. "Balance must be maintained through." A sudden tremor shook the library. Books rattled on their shelves as a wave of force emanated from Venna, her skin flaring with brilliant light. She stumbled, catching herself against a bookcase. "Venna!" Roxa moved to support her companion, her own patterns flickering erratically. James rushed to help, but Venna held up a warning hand. "Don't touch me. Not while the energy is unstable." "This is happening faster than before," Roxa said, her voice tight with concern. "The transition period usually allows more time." James ran back to his grandmother's journal, flipping through pages frantically. Here, she wrote about an emergency stabilization technique. Something about the mansion's foundation stones? "The anchor points," Venna gasped, her form seeming to flicker like a bad television signal. "But they're temporary measures at best. Using them too often causes complications." "Show me," James demanded. "Now." They descended into the mansion's basement, a vast network of stone corridors that seemed older than the house itself. Ancient symbols covered the walls, glowing faintly with their own light. In the center of the largest chamber, a circular pattern was carved into the floor, surrounded by crystalline structures that pulsed with deep purple energy. "Your ancestors built this containment system," Roxa explained as she helped Venna to the center of the circle. "It helps regulate our energy when needed, but each use strains the overall balance further." James studied the symbols, recognition flickering in his mind. These matched the diagrams in grandmother's journal. She theorized they weren't just for containment, but communication. Communication? Venna managed through clenched teeth, her form still unstable. "Yes," James moved around the circle, touching specific crystals in sequence as indicated in the journal. She believed the original contract wasn't about servitude at all. These symbols, they're not about binding or containing. They're about connection. The crystals began to hum, their purple light intensifying. Venna's unstable energy seemed to synchronize with the pattern, her form gradually solidifying. "How did you know which sequence to use?" Roxa asked, watching in amazement. Grandmother's notes. She spent years decoding these symbols, but never had the chance to test her theories. James continued activating crystals, following the complex pattern described in the journal. She believed the entire mansion was built as some kind of interface, not a prison. The humming reached a crescendo, and suddenly the chamber was filled with holographic projections, star charts, mathematical equations, and complex diagrams floating in the air around them. Impossible, Venna whispered, her stability restored but her expression shocked. These are navigation charts from our home system. No human should be able to access this data. James stared at the swirling information surrounding them. Unless that was the point all along. The contract, the service, the energy exchange, what if it was all just a framework for something bigger? Before either alien could respond, a new tremor shook the chamber, different from before, deeper. The crystal's purple light turned red, and warning symbols began flashing in the holographic display. What's happening? James demanded. The interface activation has triggered something. Roxa's patterns swirled with anxiety. Systems that have been dormant for centuries are coming online. Systems? What systems? Venna's silver hair floated as if in an unseen wind. It seems, Master Thorn, that your grandmother's theories were correct. This mansion isn't just a house, it's a hub, a nexus point in a network we thought lost to time. And you've just reactivated it. The chamber continued to shake as more systems awakened, and James realized his simple inheritance had just become infinitely more complicated. The real question wasn't why his grandmother had left him the mansion, it was what she expected him to do with it. The mansion's newly awakened systems proved both a blessing and a curse. While they helped stabilize Venna and Roxa's energy levels temporarily, they also drew unwanted attention. 3 days after the basement incident, James was woken by urgent knocking at his bedroom door. Master Thorn, Roxa's voice carried unusual tension. We have visitors. James found a black SUV parked in the curved driveway, its tinted windows reflecting the morning sun. 2 figures in expensive suits stood at the front door, a tall man with graying temples and a younger woman whose sharp eyes missed nothing. Mr. Thorn, the man smiled without warmth. I'm Richard Blackwood, and this is my associate Ms. Winters. We represent certain parties interested in your grandmother's estate. The estate's not for sale, James said firmly, noting how both Venna and Roxa had positioned themselves protectively on either side of him. Oh, we're not here to buy, Winters spoke with calculated precision. We're here about the energy signatures your property has been emanating. Signatures that violate several international agreements. James felt Venna tense beside him. I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about. Let's not play games, Blackwood's smile vanished. We know about your unusual inheritance. The Blackwood family has monitored the Thorn line for generations, waiting for someone to finally activate the hub. The word hit James like a physical blow. Hub. The same term Venna had used in the basement. You know about the systems. We know everything, Winters stated. Including the fact that your alien's energy is destabilizing faster than normal. Our readings suggest total collapse within days unless drastic action is taken. Roxa's constellation patterns flared. The Blackwoods. Of course. The rival bloodline mentioned in the original contract. Rival? James glanced between his maids and the visitors. What do you mean? The contract was never meant to be exclusive to one family, Blackwood explained. Your ancestors stole that privilege from mine. Now the system is failing, and you have no idea how to prevent catastrophe. We can help, Winters added smoothly. Our family has spent centuries studying the technology. Sign over access to the hub, and we'll ensure your aliens survive the transition. They're not my aliens, James snapped. And I don't trust you. Your trust is irrelevant, Blackwood's voice hardened. The energy readings are growing exponentially. When your servants lose control, the resulting explosion will level half the city. Sign the papers, or we'll be forced to take more direct action. The threat hung in the air like smoke. James felt Venna and Roxa's energy crackling around him, their forms flickering with barely contained power. 3 days, Winters held out a business card. That's how long you have before we're legally obligated to inform certain agencies about the situation. Agencies that won't be nearly as diplomatic as we are. After they left, James paced the foyer while Venna and Roxa watched with increasing agitation. Their normally pristine appearances showed signs of strain. Venna's silver hair now moved in violent swirls, while Roxa's constellation patterns pulsed erratically. The Blackwoods speak some truth, Venna admitted reluctantly. The energy buildup is accelerating beyond normal parameters. The hub's activation changed something fundamental in the balance. Show me everything, James demanded. No more secrets. If we're going to solve this, I need to understand what we're really dealing with. They returned to the basement chamber, where the holographic displays now filled the entire space. James saw star charts, technical diagrams, and strings of alien text scrolling through the air. The hub was designed as a waypoint, Roxa explained, her voice strained. A connection between your world and ours. The contract was meant to establish peaceful cooperation between our species. But something went wrong, Venna continued. The Thorn and Blackwood families were chosen as joint custodians, but your ancestor, Elizabeth Thorn, discovered corruption in the Blackwood line. They meant to use the hub's power for conquest rather than connection. So she locked them out, James realized. Changed the contract to bind you solely to our family. Yes, but the system was never meant to operate under such restrictions. The energy imbalance has grown worse with each generation. Venna's form flickered violently. Your grandmother sought a solution, but died before. She cut off with a cry of pain as surge of power rippled through the chamber. The holographic displays twisted, showing warning symbols in angry red. The Blackwood's presence accelerated the degradation, Roxa gasped, her own form beginning to destabilize. Their proximity to the hub after so long. James rushed to the crystal array, trying to repeat the stabilization sequence from before. Nothing happened. It won't work twice, Venna managed through gritted teeth. The emergency measures are burned out. The chamber's walls began to crack as waves of uncontrolled energy pulsed from the two aliens. James grabbed his grandmother's journal, frantically flipping pages until he found her final entries. Listen to me, he read aloud. The solution isn't in the technology or the contract. It's in the truth we've been afraid to face. The hub isn't failing, it's evolving. And so must we. The ground shook beneath them as decades of accumulated energy threatened to tear reality apart. James looked at his grandmother's words, then at the two beings who had watched over his family for generations. In that moment, he realized exactly what needed to be done, and why his grandmother had chosen him as her heir. The mansion's basement chamber had become a maelstrom of energy. Holographic displays flickered wildly as James tried to make sense of his grandmother's final message. Venna and Roxa's forms wavered between solid and ethereal, their carefully maintained human-like appearances breaking down to reveal glimpses of their true nature. Your grandmother, Venna managed through waves of energy distortion, she knew this would happen. The awakening of the hub wasn't an accident. James clutched the journal tighter. She wrote about evolution, about the hub changing. But it's not just the hub, is it? It's you. Roxa's constellation patterns swirled into impossible geometric shapes. We were never meant to maintain these forms indefinitely. The contract, it was meant to be temporary. A bridge between species until we were ready, James finished. He looked at the surrounding technology with new understanding. This isn't just a waypoint between worlds. It's an incubator. A place for both our species to grow together. A violent tremor shook the chamber as the mansion's ancient foundations groaned under the strain. Above them, footsteps thundered. The Blackwoods had returned, no doubt with reinforcements. Master Thorn, Vena's voice took on an otherworldly resonance. What you're suggesting, the merger of our energies, it's never been attempted. The risk is better than certain destruction, James interrupted. He moved to the center of the crystal array, where the energy currents were strongest. My grandmother didn't choose me because I could maintain the old balance. She chose me because I could help create a new one. James, Roxa used his first name for the first time, her form bleeding colors that human eyes were never meant to see. If we do this, there's no going back. You'll be changed. We'll all be changed. The chamber door burst open. Blackwood and Winters rushed in, followed by men carrying advanced technological equipment. Stop! Blackwood commanded. You have no idea what you're doing. Actually, James smiled, remembering all his grandmother's stories about seeing beyond illusions. I think I'm the only one who does. He placed his hands on two of the primary crystals, feeling their ancient power humming through his bones. The contract was never about servitude or power. It was about preparation. For what? Winters demanded, her composed facade cracking. For this. James closed his eyes and opened himself to the energy that had been building for generations. The crystal array blazed with light as centuries of accumulated power flowed through him. Vena and Roxa moved in perfect synchronization, their forms merging with the hub's energy field. The holographic displays exploded into new patterns, not just star charts and technical data, but the complete history of two species preparing for an impossible convergence. Your ancestors tried to force control, James told the stunned Blackwoods as reality itself seemed to bend around them. But you can't control evolution. You can only guide it. Help it. Nurture it. The chamber filled with light as bright as a newborn star. James felt himself changing, his consciousness expanding to encompass perspectives and dimensions he'd never imagined. Through it all, he felt Vena and Roxa's presence, no longer bound by contract, but joined in a symphony of possibility. When the light faded, the chamber had transformed. The crude crystal technology had evolved into something organic and alive, pulsing with self-sustaining energy. The holographic displays showed not just two worlds, but countless others, all connected through the new network being born. James opened eyes that could now see far more than before. His skin held traces of the same iridescence as his former servants, while they had gained aspects of human solidity. The boundary between species had become permeable, allowing for something entirely new to emerge. What have you done? Blackwood whispered, staring at the transformation in horror. What my grandmother knew was possible, James replied, his voice carrying the same musical undertones as Vena and Roxa's. I've completed the bridge. The real question is, will you continue fighting the future, or help us build it? Winters stepped forward, her sharp eyes taking in the changed chamber. The energy readings, they're stable. More than stable, they're evolving. Growing stronger. Because now they have somewhere to go, Roxa explained, her form shifting between human and alien aspects with fluid grace. The hub isn't just connecting our worlds anymore. It's creating a new one. Your ancestors' corruption of the contract forced us to wait, Vena added, directing her words to the Blackwoods. But perhaps that delay served a purpose. It gave humanity time to advance, to be ready for true partnership rather than dominance. James felt the power of the transformed hub flowing through the mansion's foundation, spreading outward in waves that would gradually awaken similar potential worldwide. His grandmother's final journal entry made perfect sense now. The truth isn't something you discover, dear James. It's something you become. 1 month after the transformation, the Victorian mansion had become something else entirely. While its exterior maintained its historic facade, a concession to the neighborhood's character, its interior spaces flowed with organic architecture that merged human aesthetics with alien efficiency. The former servants' quarters had evolved into meditation chambers where humans could safely experience higher dimensional perspectives. James stood in what had once been the grand foyer, watching as Winters directed a team of scientists in cataloging the changes. After the initial shock, she had proven to be an invaluable ally, her analytical mind perfectly suited to understanding the hybrid technology emerging from the transformation. The Blackwood family's research is proving useful, she reported, her tablet displaying complex energy readings. Once we stopped trying to control the process and started working with it, everything changed. Richard is still adjusting, but he'll come around. And the government agencies? James asked, though his expanded awareness had already shown him the answer. Convinced that controlled evolution is better than forced containment. The potential benefits are too significant to ignore. Winters gestured to where a group of officials were being led through the mansion's new capabilities by Roxa. The former maid had taken to her role as ambassador with natural grace. Her constellation patterns now shifted in response to the emotions and understanding of those around her, creating intuitive connections between species. She caught James's eye and smiled, a gesture somehow both human and utterly alien. Venna emerged from what had once been the basement hub, her silver hair flowing with solar winds that existed in dimensions most humans were only beginning to perceive. The network continues to expand, she reported. We've detected 7 other potential nexus points worldwide. Places where the boundary between worlds naturally thins. My grandmother's journal mentioned other families, James nodded. Other bloodlines that might be ready for similar transformations. The Thorns and Blackwoods were just the beginning, Venna agreed. The contract was never meant for just 2 families, it was a prototype for humanity's potential. James felt a familiar presence and turned to see a holographic projection of his grandmother manifesting nearby. After the transformation, they discovered her consciousness had been partially preserved in the mansion's evolved systems, not truly alive, but not entirely gone either. You see now, don't you? Her image smiled. Why it had to be you? The others thought power was the goal, but you understood it was about connection. I had good teachers. James glanced at Venna and Roxa. Even if they didn't know they were teaching me. The mansion hummed with activity as more officials, scientists, and potential initiates arrived. Each day brought new discoveries as humanity began to grasp the true scope of what was possible. The old contract, with its rigid boundaries and forced subservience, had been replaced by something far more profound, genuine partnership between species. There will be resistance, Winters noted, watching as another group struggled to adapt to their first exposure to higher dimensional perspectives. Not everyone will welcome such dramatic change. Change is rarely comfortable, Venna observed. But it is inevitable. The only choice is whether to fight it or guide it. James moved to the mansion's front door, still solid oak, though now inlaid with living circuitry that connected it to the greater network. Outside, the morning fog was lifting to reveal a world that looked the same but felt entirely different. Humanity's first steps into a larger universe had begun not with conquest or crisis, but with the simple act of seeing beyond appearances. Roxa joined him at the door, her form shifting subtly between states. What are you thinking about? The first day I arrived, James smiled. When I thought I was inheriting just a house and 2 unusual maids. How simple everything seemed then. Do you regret it? She asked. Knowing what you know now. James looked at his own hands, where traces of alien iridescence mingled with human flesh, a visible sign of the changes that went far deeper. In the library, his grandmother's journal lay open to her final entry. The greatest inheritances are not the ones we possess, but the ones that possess us. The ones that change us into what we were always meant to become. No, he said finally. Some truths are worth becoming. Behind them, the mansion continued its gradual transformation, each change rippling out into the world like waves from a stone dropped in cosmic waters. The contract that had bound two species in artificial hierarchy had evolved into something far more powerful, a bridge between worlds, built on understanding rather than obligation. Vena appeared on his other side, completing their trinity. The humans are asking what happens next. We show them, James said simply. One truth at a time. Above them, the morning sun caught the mansion's windows, making them shine like portals to other dimensions, which, in many ways, they now were. The age of separation was ending. The age of integration had begun. And in the distance, other mansions waited, other families prepared, and other bridges began to form between the worlds. The transformation that had started with a simple inheritance was spreading, guided by the wisdom of those who understood that true power lay not in control, but in connection. The truth, as it turned out, was just the beginning.